1944. Anzio. Dawn is thin and grey over the beach. Canvas shivers with each breath of wind. The smell of salt and old blood hangs low. Inside the advanced surgical tent, steam from a heater fogs a lamp, and the field lantern lies on its side like a small, patient son. Hands move quickly. Gloved fingers knot a bandage. A palm probes a shallow contour beneath the ribs. The pilot on the stretcher breathes short, each inhalation a complaint against the cold. A folded photograph peeks from a torn pocket. 2 children in snow. "He's the enemy," someone says, low and flat. "He's a patient," Raymond answers, not looking up. Ivy leans over the light, raising the lantern until its beam cuts a bright circle on the working field. Instruments clink. A scalpel catches the gold, and the surgeon's hand trembles only slightly. From outside, a distant boom rolls the tent like a palm. A tracer flashes on the horizon. A radio crackles a clipped order. "Stabilize and wait." The words hang in the air like a verdict. Raymond feels the pulse under his fingertips. It is thin and racing. He slides a small ampule into the tray and reaches for the clamps. For a breath, the world narrows to the lamp's rim, the photograph, the man on the table. And then the generator falters, and the lantern's light stutters. Mercy where hate was expected. The tent holds a small, stubborn light, while the world outside measures lives in orders and coordinates. Raymond, a young medic, and Ivy, a steady nurse, work with the quiet insistence of people who learned a different calculation. Their oath against a radio command, the bandage against a bullet list. A torn photograph, a shallow breath, an enemy soldier counted as a dying man on the stretcher. The moment asks for triage not of nationality but of need. They improvise with clamps and morphine, conserve a single ampule, trade a glance that says what no order will. Someone has to be saved now. The generator hums back to life, the light steadies, and for a heartbeat the tent is only a field hospital where mercy is the procedure. If a sworn oath can outweigh an order, this is how it happens. The scene sits on a narrow strip of the Italian coast, the Anzio beachhead in January of 1944. Raymond Clark is assigned to a mobile surgical detachment, a small, hard-pressed unit tucked behind the front lines and tied to an infantry division by radio and convoy. Ivy Bennett has come from a British casualty clearing station and works here under a shared command. Together they staff a field hospital whose purpose is plain and urgent: triage, stop the bleeding, perform the bare emergency surgeries that will buy time for evacuation. The tented compound smells of disinfectant and the sea. Red Cross markings flap on pale canvas. Stretchers line the floor or wait under tarpaulins, and every able hand knows the rhythm. Assess, bandage, move the barely stable to the next truck. Supplies are rationed, morphine ampules counted like coins, bandage rolls allocated by urgency. Outside, shelling from distant batteries folds the horizon into smoke. Men in trenches 2 miles away listen for the telltale snap of a mortar and count seconds between blasts. This is work, governed by medical practice and by orders. A medic's oath and a nurse's steady hand meet military discipline at the doorway. The Geneva Convention offers a principle, medical neutrality, that should make the tents sacrosanct. In practice, it becomes another factor to weigh against the immediate arithmetic of survival. Who will be dead if the team stops what it is doing? When an enemy soldier arrives with his abdomen rigid and breathing thin, the choice is not abstract. Triage asks for need, not nationality. The risks are real: discipline, reprimand, the delay of other wounded. But so is the life in front of the surgeon. In this place of scraped instruments and whispered prayers, they are forced to answer plainly. Oath over orders, mercy over propaganda. They bring him in on a stretcher through the slit of canvas that still smells of sand and engine oil. 2 medics half carry, half drag the pilot into the light. Uniform shredded at the shoulder, breath like a small bell that will not toll in time. Ivy moves to the head and finds a photograph folded against the man's chest. She smooths it with a gloved finger, as if a paper relic could steady a breathing body. Raymond steps close, hands already into assessment. Airway, breathing, circulation. while voices outside count the distance to the next barrage in seconds. A sergeant hangs back at the threshold, mud on his boots, watching like someone keeping time. "Any ID?" he asks. "No tags. German insignia on the collar," the medic says. "Enemy?" the sergeant says, as if it should decide everything. "He's a patient," Raymond replies. His voice is plain. He checks pupils by the light, lists the wounds, notes how the abdomen is tense and the pulse climbs with each shallow breath. The tent tightens to the size of a heartbeat. They pull a field blanket up to the chin, lay out clamps, and wheel a basin. Ivy holds the lantern. It cuts a clean circle on the surgeon's gloves, and in that small sun the man's face loosens like someone remembering a phrase. They move fast. A simple crush injury to the abdomen is suspected. Organs are not named aloud, only actions. Stop the bleeding, prevent shock, and get him breathing more easily. Raymond rubs his thumb over an ampule and draws a line of morphine. 2 milligrams at a time are the rule when supply is lean, and the medic injects slowly, watching for response. The pilot mutters a single word in German. Ivy tucks the photograph into a pocket on the stretcher where it can't fall away. Outside, a mortar blows at a rhythm like a clock resetting. Arrival and triage in a field hospital are immediate sensory acts. A medic's first duty is to assess airway, breathing, and circulation. Quick checks that determine whether someone needs immediate surgical intervention or can wait for evacuation. In this environment, a rigid abdomen and a rising pulse suggest internal bleeding and potential shock. Without prompt action, the patient will deteriorate. Triage is supposed to be impartial, need first, identity later. But the reality of war adds another layer: chain of command, scarce resources, and orders that may direct medics to delay major procedures on prisoners. The decision to begin treatment is therefore both medical and moral, a point where oath and orders can conflict. Raymond's hands do what the oath asks before his jaw answers the drill sergeant's question. They cut a sterile field from the emergency kit on a tarp spread atop a wooden crate. It is a makeshift operating area, a single lamp, 2 clamps, a scalpel dulled by sharpening more times than it was designed for. Ivy tapes the edges of the field with tape that peels like old skin. The generator whirs. A breath of warmth circulates the tent. Raymond talks out loud as he works, an old habit that keeps the team steady. "Clamp here," he says, placing a vessel clip where a finger had been steadying a fold of cloth. "Only 1 more ampoule," Ivy says, lifting a small glass vial like a jewel. 2 shots left after this. "Give 1, Raymond answers. "Watch his pressure." They perform what they can under light that stutters with the generator and under time that tightens as if the clock were another patient. Raymond makes an incision small enough to reach and wide enough to find what is needed. His voice is calm, counting steps. He ties off a bleeding vessel and sutures what can be sutured with a thread on hand. Instruments are recycled with careful hands, sterilized in hot water, swabbed with alcohol, passed between gloved fingers that might shake and do not admit it. An emergency laparotomy in a field setting is an exercise in minimalism. Do enough to save life without consuming resources the unit cannot replenish. Sterility is improvised but not abandoned. Boiled water, alcohol swabs, and the careful cadence of passing instruments replace an operating theater. Morphine and anesthetics are rationed. Decisions about dosages are tied directly to supply constraints. Surgery on a prisoner elevates the stakes. Each ampule used for him is 1 less for an Allied soldier who may be evacuated later. The surgeon must weigh immediate life-saving need against potential future need, but the medical calculus centers on the patient before him. The oath guides the hand when the ledger of supplies leans the other way. Later that night, the ward is a shallow chorus of breaths. The pilot lies with one eye half open and the photograph tucked beneath his hand. A half-dozen stretchers line the canvas in graduated ranks. A young corporal from the infantry, grazed along the jaw, sleeps fitfully across from him. A radio operator refuses to sleep and keeps the tense log by the light. Ivy moves from cot to cot, adjusting dressings, counting bandage rolls, murmuring orders that sound like lullabies. Outside, a fire spits and throws a loose glow over the tarpaulins. Men shift in their sleep with the small noises of people still outside the fight. "He's breathing better," Ivy says quietly to Raymond, who is tallying supplies again. "And the sergeant?" she asks. "In the truck when they called. Stable." "Then why risk the quiet?" the radio operator asks from under his blanket. "Orders came down clear. No major surgeries on prisoners until the convoy arrives." "It's not about orders," Ivy says. She smooths the pilot's blanket. "It's about patching what will not wait." They trade small smiles that are more like pacts. The tent records it all in its soft, absorbent way. The smell of antiseptic, the metallic tick of instruments drying, the low murmur of those who cannot sleep. The pilot dreams in thin phrases of home. He coughs in his sleep and Ivy presses a hand to his forehead. The night ward in a field hospital is a liminal space where clinical practice meets moral reflection. Staff wrestle with orders issued by distant command and with the immediate needs in front of them. Rules that prohibit major surgeries on prisoners until evacuation aim to standardize care and preserve limited operating capacity. But they cannot account for the clinical reality of a patient who will not survive transport. The medical team's role is to stabilize and to prevent death when possible. The nurse's constant presence, monitoring pulses, changing dressings, offering measured morphine, keeps a patient in a zone where evacuation is plausible. This work is intimate and makes visible the tension between discipline and compassion, reinforcing a principle the staff sometimes state quietly. The patient's need is the first calculus. Morning shrapnel of conversation reaches the tent, reports of a supply convoy stalled by ice, an order to hold position for at least another 12 hours. A lieutenant comes in to inspect the roster with a face drawn from sleeplessness. He pulls Raymond aside and repeats the instruction with the bluntness of a man who has radioed more than he can recall. "You started a major procedure on a captive," the lieutenant says. "Command's clear on this. We can't afford the risk. Consequences are real." Raymond looks at the list, names, conditions, evacuation times, and then he looks at the pilot whose bandage lies white and soft against his chest. Raymond's reply is a soft, exact thing. If we had waited, he would not have a pulse to record. The lieutenant's silence is a thin, brittle thing. He writes in his notebook, sighs, and moves on. Back at the table, Raymond and Ivy stitch on with hands that have decided already how to measure triumph. When a stretcher is rolled in with a sergeant who will likely transfer out that day, Ivy checks the man, gives a nod to the convoy staff, and points the order of evacuation. First the sergeant, then the others. She does not tell anyone she had written the enemy pilot's name on the same list. Orders from command are meant to manage scarce resources and liability in the chaos of battle. Following them keeps the unit aligned with broader operational needs. But within the field hospital, medics and nurses face immediate clinical decisions that may not align with those higher-level directives. Choosing to operate on a prisoner can bring reprimand, formal investigation, or endanger the surgical team's standing. The calculation is practical rather than ideological. Will the patient survive to be evacuated? And what will be lost by performing the procedure now? Raymond's decision to act reflects a professional judgment, that the immediate probability of death outweighed the procedural risk of disciplinary measures. In wartime, such judgments are fraught, but they rest on the physician's commitment to preserve life when possible. Resource accounting becomes its own liturgy. Ivy lays out a shelf of supplies in the gray morning, tallying bandage rolls like currency, counting ampules, listening as the tally is matched against the number of mouths and wounds. A soldier arrives with a shattered wrist and a complaint about a tooth. A medic returns with news of 2 more incoming from a patrol. The pilot sleeps, caught between breath and waking, the photograph tucked under his palm like a promise. "How many morphine vials left?" asks the corporal, voice rough. 5, Ivy says. "We'll use 2 on the pilot, 1 now, 1 later if he needs. 2 for the next evac, 1 for the worst case." "The worst case might be him," the corporal answers, meaning one of their own. Ivy does not flinch. She places a fresh bandage roll over the pilot's wound and then hands the corporal a warm canteen cup, now a makeshift bowl, because the nurser's chores here are also small acts of provision. She watches as he drinks, and his fingers steady. Then she marks the supplies ledger with a quiet hand. Scarcity defines decisions in a forward surgical unit. Supplies, analgesics, bandage, suture material are finite and must be allocated under triage principles that prioritize the likelihood of survival and the immediacy of need. To allocate a morphine vial to a prisoner is to accept a trade-off, one fewer dose for an Allied soldier later. These are not moral abstractions, but concrete arithmetic that medics perform every hour. The Geneva Convention articulates neutrality and care for wounded combatants. In practice, medics interpret that through the lens of survival probability and mission capability. Nurses like Ivy perform both clinical tasks and resource stewardship, ensuring that mercy is applied where it has practical effect. Late in the afternoon, a new stretcher slides into the tent. An American sergeant with a puncture wound through the thigh and a steady pulse. He is conscious and angry about delays. A radio message buzzes with a convoy ETA that has slipped by 6 hours. Command is curt and patched with static. "You've spent time on a prisoner," the sergeant says between clenched teeth, eyes sharp. "Where did that leave us when we needed it?" Raymond meets the sergeant's gaze without defensiveness. "If he'd bled out, we would have lost another human life," he says. "We made a choice to save one. You're stable and ready for transport. He's stable too." The sergeant grunts. He accepts a sip of coffee from Ivy and folds into the cot with reluctant trust. The pilot opens his eye and smiles faintly at something only he can see. He pats the photograph and lips the corner with a movement that is not language. Ivy watches him and then writes one word on a chart: salved. Confrontation with Allied soldiers about resource use is inevitable. Soldiers see triage decisions as zero-sum when every vial and stretcher is a lifeline. The medic's explanation, that the patient's survival was immediate and that the sergeant remained transportable, translates clinical judgment into reassurance. These conversations are not about proving moral superiority, but about maintaining the fragile cohesion between medical teams and combat units. The nurse's small acts, offering coffee, writing the word salved, serve as social balm and record of humanity preserved amid duty. Evening reshapes the tent into a place of meticulous record-keeping. Raymond writes operative notes in a ledger, his handwriting careful as if the strokes could protect him against later inquiry. He logs times, medications, and the smallest facts. 2 ampules of morphine, clamps applied, suture material identified by lot number. Ivy stands open, holding the lantern low so the pilot sleeps. His chest rises and falls with a steadier rhythm. "You wrote the order down as emergency intervention," she says softly. "Yes," Raymond replies. "Honest will look better than excuse." He signs with initials and a blank line where no rank can nullify the act he performed. The lantern sits on the tray like a witness, its handle warm where Ivy had held it. Outside, someone cheers when a convoy finally moves. Distant wheels crunch over hard earth and bring a promise of movement. Documentation in a field hospital is both clinical necessity and institutional protection. Operative notes and medication logs create a legal and professional trail that can justify immediate decisions taken under duress. Recording an intervention as emergency communicates both the urgency and the rationale. For medics and nurses, accurate records are ethical obligations. They preserve the truth of what happened and provide evidence should command question the choice. The lantern's light is a small but persistent symbol here, a tool that enabled action, and now sits as a mute attestant to the decision that was made in its circle. The convoy comes and goes with a bruise of soot on the canvas. Stretchers roll like small, solemn waves toward the trucks, and the pilot is among them, wrapped and tagged, his photograph folded and returned to a pocket by Ivy. She pins a note to his blanket, name unknown, status, stabilized, and slips a cloth strip with a Red Cross mark into the pocket where the photograph sleeps. Raymond watches the convoy fade and hears the tent close like an eye. A medical officer arrives the next morning with a report in his hand and a gravity that is not yet accusation but not entirely praise either. He reads the log, taps the entry, and looks at Raymond. "You acted outside orders," he says. "You saved a life, but you knew the instructions." Raymond looks at the man on the stretcher, now in a recovery bed, and then at Ivy, who meets his glance and nods once. "I followed the patient," Raymond says. "That is what I swore to do." Evacuation and subsequent review are the organizational endpoints where field decisions are reconciled with command doctrine. Triage, treatment, and transfer intersect with bureaucracy, and after-action reports distill chaos into line items. The medical officer's query is formal. Had protocol been followed? Raymond's response reframes the protocol with the primacy of patient care. For military medics, the oath and the professional obligation to do no harm can motivate actions that appear to conflict with orders. These moments of account show how personal integrity and institutional rules collide, and how in the end, the measure of a medic's choice is often the life whose pulse continues. The accounting ended, but the story did not stop at the ledger. In the days that followed, the field hospital settled into a new rhythm that held the pilot as both puzzle and person. He received a name by sound and by halting translation: Klaus. The name came first from a captured leaflet with German print that had slipped into his boot, then from a whispered exchange at his bedside when he managed a single clear syllable and pointed at the photograph. The staff learned to say it out loud, as if naming him anchored him to the world they kept trying to save. Klaus's recovery was slow and unsteady. He slept in a cot near the tent's rear, where the canvas was thick and the wind less accusing. Ivy watched his breath and measured his urine, checked his dressing, and smoothed the blanket under his chin. When he woke, he would look at the photograph with a tenderness that made the mechanics of war seem absurdly small. He spoke in broken phrases and in the long, patient gestures of someone who had lost the language of disputation and kept only the grammar of need. Raymond began to spend quiet hours at the recovery table, more to sit and hold a light for another human being than to perform any further repairs. "You speak German?" Klaus asked one night, the words clumsy but deliberate. "A little," Raymond answered, surprised at the sound of his own voice in that register. "Not like you." Klaus smiled, the scar at his temple twitching. He pointed at the photograph, and then to Raymond, then at his own chest, as if to say, "This is why I lived." Ivy translated what she could, and when she could not, she let silence do the rest. Recovery after emergency surgery requires monitoring for infection, providing nutrition and analgesia, and gradual mobilization. In a field hospital, these steps are taken with an eye to evacuation timetables and available transport. Psychological recovery, recognizing the patient as more than a combatant, is less formal but equally important. Nurses and medics serve as interpreters of need when language fails, and their small acts, handing a spoon, folding a photograph back into a pocket, express the same professional ethic that guided the scalpel. Word of what had been done spread in measured ways. Some in the unit called Raymond reckless, others quietly commended him. The medical officer filed his report, and the chain of command discussed the incident as one more problem among many: how to enforce rules that sometimes collided with clinical exigency. Rumors always carried more heat than facts, and some men suggested that the pilot might have been a spy, or that saving an enemy would mean betrayal. The tent itself absorbed these voices and refracted them. Ivy moved through them like someone moving through smoke, keeping her attention on the immediate needs of the tent: dressings, appetite, warmth, while letting the larger debate stay on the wind. "You did right," an old corporal told Raymond as he passed by one evening, a cigarette pinched between two fingers. "We're not monsters, we're medics." Raymond nodded. He heard the man's words, but he felt the tug of other consequences. A reprimand could be a minor blot on a record or a formal investigation that would slow the unit. He had no taste for notoriety. His taste was for a pulse in a chest. Yet he was not indifferent to the ledger that governed careers and promotions. In military organizations, decisions that deviate from orders attract scrutiny because they can set precedents and are difficult to reconcile with supply chains and operational priorities. However, in medical ethics, The principle to attend to the sick or wounded is foundational. Medics who act to save life in immediate danger often justify their choices on clinical grounds. If delay will cause death, then intervention is warranted. The tension is institutional. Commanders must maintain standards and control resources, while clinicians must prioritize the individual in front of them. As Klaus regained strength, small rituals built a fragile rapport across divided lines. A soldier left a pair of knitted socks in his cot. A corporal who had once railed against the decision brought over a cup of black coffee, which Klaus accepted with careful gratitude. Ivy mended a ripped corner of the photograph with a thin strip of adhesive and tucked it back where his fingers could find it. Each of these gestures was a quiet violation of the dominant narrative the war tried to impose, that the other side was a faceless enemy. Here, in the quiet of the tent, people began to look like people, and that recognition shaped the way medical care was practiced. One evening, when the shelling was a low, distant drum rather than a sudden crack, Raymond performed a small, risky thing. He offered a blood donation. The field hospital had only limited stored blood, and cross-matching was crude at best. There was no full laboratory. Blood typing was a matter of cards and careful notes. A companion needed blood for a delayed transfusion, and Raymond volunteered his arm. Ivy prepared the equipment, a makeshift sterile field, a single vein to draw from. The needle slid in. The first warm trickle filled the bag. Raymond watched the pilot sleep and felt, with a clarity that was almost unbearable, how close life and death sat to one another. "You're mad," Ivy said softly, though her eyes were warm. "Then let it be for a good reason," Raymond answered. Blood transfusion in frontline conditions is dangerous and logistically complex. Compatibility testing was primitive compared to modern standards, and transfusions carried risks of transfusion reactions and infection. Yet, in the calculus of survival, a matched unit of blood can mean the difference between life and death. When a clinician offers his own blood, it is both a practical resource and a moral statement. The body's generosity becomes a literal extension of the oath. Such acts are not standard procedure, but are sometimes necessary when supplies run thin. The incident with the pilot became a quiet litmus test for the unit's cohesion. Higher command never sought to court-martial Raymond, but he received a formal letter noting the breach of standing orders and a warning registered in his file. The reprimand was more administrative than punitive. In the end, the paperwork acknowledged the complexity of the decision without entirely endorsing it. The medical officer's final comment in the file recognized that clinical judgment had prevented a death, an acknowledgement that had weight even as it insisted on discipline. Raymond accepted the letter and folded it into his desk drawer. It did not change the fact that a man had been saved and that, in the tight geometry of that tent, the one life preserved had influenced others. He had no illusions about heroism. His hands simply did what his training and his oath required. Yet he knew that the record would follow him, a small stain on a long career, an argument made permanent in ink. Official reprimands serve multiple purposes. They maintain order, provide accountability, and serve as a deterrent to others. They also recognize that decisions taken in the field are complex and often morally ambiguous. For many medics, the knowledge that one did everything possible to save a life supplies its own ethical vindication, but professional systems nevertheless require documentation and consequences to preserve the chain of command. Klaus's healing continued, and with healing came moments of exchange that were small and human. One morning, Ivy found him awake and sitting up, fingers worrying the edge of the photograph. He looked at her and then pointed to the photograph and then to the open sky beyond the tent flap. "Children," he said haltingly, and then tapped his own face. "Father," and then tilted his head with an expression of carved longing that needed no translation. Ivy brought over a notebook and a stub of pencil. She drew 2 quick circles and wrote the words, "Children," and "Home." Klaus traced the letters as best he could and smiled. Raymond stood by and watched these interactions with the professional's quiet pleasure in seeing a patient regain the small competencies that illness had stolen. "Are you afraid?" Raymond asked once, in the sparse English he used when he wanted to be both direct and kind. Klaus met his gaze and answered in his native tongue, "Yes, and I am ashamed." Then he added, in a softer dialect, "But I am alive." Restoring a patient's sense of self after trauma involves more than physical repair. It includes addressing fear, shame, and the disorientation of being a prisoner of war. Nurses often serve as psychological anchors, helping patients to name their fears and to reassemble a narrative of identity. Language and small acts of kindness, drawing, pointing, offering a warm cup, help reconstruct a life that war had fragmented. Rumors of official displeasure were met with practical solidarity. A few of the medical staff quietly ensured that Klaus received extra blankets and a small ration of fresh fruit when it could be obtained. An enlisted man, moved perhaps by a photo of his own family, slipped a packet of cigarettes into Klaus's kit. These acts were not monumental. They were gestures of community. They showed how, in a constrained and often brutal environment, ordinary compassion coalesced into a practice that resisted the state's impulse to categorize people solely as enemy. "Some men will never forgive you," the corporal had said earlier to Raymond. "Others won't even notice." "I didn't do it for thanks," Raymond had answered. "I did it because I had to." Acts of mercy in wartime are often localized and informal, carried out by individuals or small groups rather than by the state. They can be quietly subversive in that they assert a private moral code over impersonal directives. This is not to suggest that these acts are universally praised. They complicate loyalties and can create tension within units. Yet they persist because frontline clinicians witness the rawness of human life and are repeatedly confronted with choices where delay equals death. As Klaus grew stronger, the question of his fate resurfaced. He was a prisoner and a wounded combatant. When fit for transfer, he would go to a prisoner of war hospital under Allied custody, and later he might be repatriated or interned, depending on the progress of the war. There was also the quieter possibility that, in the slow bureaucracy of conflict, he would remain anonymous. Another man shuffled through files, perhaps forgotten. Ivy and Raymond argued for proper documentation and for care that would include his personal effects. They insisted that the photograph be preserved and that his name, Klaus Ritter, be written clearly. "He needs a record," Ivy said, "so someone can find him later." Raymond obliged. He copied notes into the official log and included the photograph's description. He stamped the form and signed his name. The paperwork was not only administrative, it was, in a modest way, an act of respect. Administrative care, making sure a patient's identity and personal items are recorded, matters in wartime because it preserves personhood within a system that often erases it. For prisoners, a proper record increases the chances of future contact with family or return. Clinicians who insist on such documentation enact a form of advocacy that aligns with both professional duty and human decency. In the weeks that followed, the field hospital endured seasons of scarcity and surge. The front moved in fits and starts. Convoys arrived late and sometimes not at all. Medics learned to conserve, to improvise, to triage with a firmness that was both clinical and moral. The pilot's presence continued to be a quiet test. He helped where he could, mending netting, fetching water, and these small labors gave him a role that was not simply passive. He exchanged stories with the British nurses about food, about snow, about the way a particular winter looked in a home he had not yet seen in years. One night, late, a shell landed too close and the tent shuddered. Everyone froze for a breath, then resumed the fragile choreography of tending. The pilot, suddenly lucid, reached out and grabbed Raymond's sleeve. "You saved me," he said in English that came like a surprise. "I owe you." Raymond's reply was simple and steady. "We are medics. We do what we can." Klaus closed his eyes and then opened them again. "I will remember." Recoveries in war zones are not linear. Moments of clarity and regression alternate, and the simple human act of gratitude can be both a relief and a burden for caregivers. For medics, thanks is rare and often muted by the context of suffering. That a patient in another uniform could offer it disrupted the neat categories war relied upon. There was no dramatic courtroom, no public debate. The reprimand on Raymond's record remained a quiet administrative smudge, and the unit moved on. Yet the incident altered several lives. Ivy kept a copy of the photograph tucked in her belongings long after the pilot was gone. Raymond carried the memory of a lamp-lit incision and of the way a man's fingers had closed over a photograph as if it could hold a whole household together. For the soldiers who had watched or protested, the episode was a lesson in the complexity of care. For some, it softened hard edges. For others, it remained an open question. When the time came for Klaus to be moved to a proper prisoner of war hospital, the convoy was as spare as any other. Ivy folded the photograph carefully and slid it into his pocket, pressing it there as if to give him an anchor. Raymond checked the bandages one last time and adjusted the tie of the blanket around his shoulders. Outside, the sea air was gray and flat. The pilot sat for a moment on the stretcher and then raised a tentative hand in a gesture that might have been a salute or a wave. Raymond lifted his own hand in return. It was a small exchange made of ordinary things. A hand, a look, a nod. "Good luck," Raymond said. Klaus answered with a simple phrase he had learned to say in broken English. "Thank you, Doctor." Transfers of prisoners are logistical operations with human consequences. Clinicians ensure that patients are moved with notation of their needs and with personal items preserved. The final gestures, hands lifted, photographs tucked away, are acts of closure as much as they are practicalities. For caregivers, watching a patient depart often brings a mixture of relief and uncertainty. After the convoy left, the tent resumed its rhythms. New patients arrived as old ones departed. The war continued to fold men and women into its complicated geometry. Yet within the daily grind, the incident left a residue, a set of practices, and a moral memory. The medical team continued to follow orders, to conserve morphine and bandage rolls, and to keep careful logs. But they also kept in their pockets the knowledge that professional oath sometimes required restraint of force and expansion of care. Strength, in this sense, was restraint. Institutional rules endure, but individual actions create precedents and shape norms. In the small ecology of a field hospital, acts of mercy accumulate into a culture that balances obedience with compassion. Such cultures are not immune to reprisal, but they persist because they meet the human demand present at the bedside. Months later, when the campaign moved and the tent was folded into the next station, the memory of the pilot remained as a thin strand running through the unit's history. Men told the story in different tones, some admiring, some critical. But the core remained. A medic had chosen a patient over an order, and a life had been spared. That choice, retold and re-examined, continued to plant the question like a seed. What does strength mean when the instruments of war press against the instruments of medicine? Stories of frontline medical decisions travel with units and inform future practice. They become part of a tacit code, a set of examples that medics and nurses draw upon when confronted with similar dilemmas. The question of strength as restraint is not settled by any single story. It is weighed again and again in the small choices that define care under fire. The lantern sits on a tray, its glass smudged. The ampule is empty, capped and small like proof. An armband carries a dark, stubborn stain. They are mute witnesses to a choice made in a circle of light. Raymond and Ivy closed the file and kept the photograph in a pocket, records of a life that did not have to end. Strength is restraint. Civilization is a choice. If this quiet act of mercy moved you, drop a comment. What would you do under that lantern circle? And subscribe for more true accounts of oath and compassion.